of the architectural history of Oldenburg began in 1978 when I cataloged the historic buildings of the Village of Spires for the Indiana Historic Sites and Structures Inventory for the Franklin County Interim Report. This field report was the basis of two graduate school papers, this lecture, and then also a successful National Register of Historic Places nomination for the Oldenburg Historic District, listed in 1983. Full disclosure, I am an Oldenburger. My mother was born there, as were her parents. Her grandparents and great-grandparents also lived in Oldenburg. And her great-grandparents had arrived before and during the Civil War. So Oldenburg is a town of about 800 inhabitants located in Franklin County in southeastern Indiana. Franklin County is one of the state's oldest counties, organized in 1822, with Brookville as the county seat, which was founded in 1804. Oldenburg is a town surrounded by rolling farmland with patches of dense woodland as well. And going back, this is a view from the 1880 Atlas of Franklin County. And this is its location. This area is called the Pocket. And it has that strange appendage there because of the old treaty line. Oldenburg was founded in 1837 by two German immigrants from the Grand Duchy of Oldenburg. They did this at the behest of the pioneer missionary Catholic priest, Father Joseph Fernanding, who was also from the Grand Duchy in northern Germany. The new settlement attracted fellow German Catholics, mostly Low German speakers, to settle there by advertising in the German language in Cincinnati, which was the collecting point for Germans moving into the eastern part of the Midwest. Oldenburg owes its character and skyline of spires to Father Franz Joseph Rudolph. This Alsatian priest was not only the spiritual leader of the community, which he pastored for 20 years, but also the civic leader as well. He arrived in Oldenburg in 1844 as the pastor to find the church and the rectory, both log structures, to be in miserable condition. By 1850, he had built a stone church, which was originally topped with an onion dome, and had arranged for the establishment of a Franciscan convent under the leadership of Sister, then later Mother Teresa Hackelmeier, who came from Vienna. In 1851, the convent and academy was founded, and then decades later, Marian University was founded in Oldenburg, and then in the 30s moved to Indianapolis. And that was an institution of the Sisters of St. Francis of Oldenburg. Under Rudolph's leadership, the present brick Holy Family Church was constructed in 1862, and he had arranged for a Franciscan friary to be established as his successors. This, as a missionary priest, he was constantly in the saddle, as were his predecessors, looking for lost sheep and establishing German parishes throughout southeastern Indiana. Throughout the 19th century and early 20th century, the little town continued to grow as a religious and educational center, and it attracted many skilled artisans, craftsmen, and merchants. The typical 19th century Oldenburger was German, Catholic, skilled, hardworking, prosperous to a point, and a property owning. Among the local industries and craft shops of the period were the St. Joseph Woolen Mill, a brickyard, a brewery, wagon makers, wainwrights, blacksmiths, lumber yards, furniture shops, masons, church painters, tanners, tailors, butchers, tinsmiths, cooper shops, shoemakers, both wooden shoes and leather shoes, harness makers and saddle makers, carpenters, numerous shops, and at one point, 14 taverns. Typical of German enclaves throughout the Midwest, the Oldenburgers transplanted their old world culture by starting schools and, of course, their parishes, taught by the friars and sisters in the German language, and organizing bands. Example of wooden shoes made in Oldenburg. So it's not just for the quaint Dutch, but throughout Northern Europe, wooden shoes are worn. This is one of the 14 taverns. It says saloon, which is a permanent sign in stamped sheet metal, above the tavern entrance. But the other door there, which is at the time a barber shop, that was the entrance to my great-great-grandfather's tailor shop, who also operated the saloon. So numerous businesses, oftentimes the proprietor living above. So he was there keeping an eye on his business and also paying for one building rather than two buildings. This is a picture published in 1937 in the Centennial History. It says our dad, so I would date this about 1900. Note that the boys in the front row are wearing wooden shoes. Also in that same history, we have a group picture. It says the Schisser Company and the Eclipse Band. This picture was taken either before or after the annual Corpus Christi procession. And the shooters, that's kind of a gun club, the Schisser Company, they were part of the procession in that they fired volleys of shotguns to honor and signify of the blessing from the Blessed Sacrament. And the band was there to accompany the singing of hymns. Music continued well into the 20th century, such as this group of Oldenburg German band, the Cheermakers. This is a view on Pearl Street at the town hall, which there were four altars set up in a route probably over a mile long. And it was attended by hundreds of parishioners and other people coming into town. And this one was set up right in front of the city hall. I noticed that when I was in Verona in Italy for Corpus Christi procession, they also had the altar set up right in front of the city hall. Following two world wars with its hateful anti-German propaganda, the Oldenburgers became more assimilated, losing the German language and becoming more Americanized with the help of railroad, which came to Batesville nearby, radio, automobile, and television. Today, the splendid survivors of this vanishing German-American culture are the historical buildings of Oldenburg. Oldenburg is significant for its architecture, which helps to tell the story of Western settlement, immigration, building traditions, and religion in America. Buildings were well built. Buildings were well built to serve the immigrants and their descendants. They built to be forever. They range from the great religious structures to a not so humble corn crib made of brick. Together, all of these buildings they make up the architectural unit that is Oldenburg. So there are examples of obviously religious buildings, domestic buildings, commercial buildings, and one public building, the town hall, which also functions as the Eagle Company, Eagle Company Fire Brigade. Also industrial buildings. The Sisters of St. Francis generated their own power. And until recently, it was on direct current, and I found out about that the hard way. And also a magnificent brick barn, which was the last great building built of the bricks which were made locally. That's also the site of the brewery. The sisters bought the land where the brewery was located. Oldenburg's architectural history can be divided into 4 periods. The first period, of course, from founding 1837 to 1858. And then, of course, the second one is the coming of the brickyard, which operated for 50 years from 1858 to 1908. And 1908 is the date of that barn. Then there's the post-brickyard period. After the brickyard closed, so we have about 50 years of wood frame buildings constructed or buildings with just brick veneers. And then the last phase is post-war, up from 1945 up to the present. First period saw many buildings constructed of stone and half timber. For instance, this house is of heavy timber frame construction. It's not a series of 2x4 studs in the wall, but heavy timber frames which are joined together and pinned together with dowels. And then the walls are typically filled in with either 2 types. One is brick, which we call brick nogging, or the other one is wattle and daub, medieval style walls, which the branches of trees and bushes are woven and then covered with mud, which is truly medieval. Many of these houses are along Water Street. This house is right across from the church. It's in the very center of town, and it has brick inside of its walls. This was the home of the Piney family for 2 generations. They were church painters, church decorators, and went throughout the Midwest decorating churches. And then there's this curiosity. The logs are laid into the creek bed, perpendicular to the bank. And you can see there's a series of those. And when I first discovered this, I knew it was something. I didn't know what it was, but it was something. Dr. Eberhard Reichmann of Indiana University told me that he saw this configuration in rural Bavarian villages, and it's called a Waschstätte. So Waschstätte is a place to do the laundry. So the logs would dam up the water, creating pools. Of course, when there's more water than what you see there. And then the logs were a place for the women and girls to sit to wash the clothing. In this house, actually, it's a cradle shop. And Eberhard Wächter, one of the first settlers in Oldenburg, he did not build cradles for babies, but a cradle here is a grain cradle, which is a device attached to a scythe, so that when the grain is cut, and I'm talking about wheat, oats, barley, when it's cut, it doesn't scatter across the field, but rather holds it together, which makes it easier to bundle it for threshing. So that's where the cradles were made. And this is also a half timber building with wattle and daub walls. Now, we see the Fachwerk in Oldenburg, Germany, which with this very large barn. And you can see there, it's all revealed because they don't use the clapboards to cover it up. And Fach means the squares that are formed, the frame, the heavy timber frame. and then in this case, it's filled in with brick. The other the other image is one that I took in 1980, is this house, which was a true Fachwerk house with the heavy timber frame, which you can easily see, and the walls are made of twigs, woven twigs, and mud. Also in this first period are a number of stone buildings, stone houses. The upper one was built on Water Street with the creek behind it, and the lower one was right there on Main Street. The streets were laid out with English names, but the inspiration for those streets were the streets of over the Rhine in Cincinnati. So there's a Sycamore Street, a Pearl Street, a Washington Street, a Vine Street, and so on, because the orientation and beginning of the Americanization starts in Cincinnati, where the immigrants are pouring in. So in the 1830s, there's a exodus from Germany, from the countryside, of people coming to America, and most of them are unlanded peasants. So the object is to buy land and to become farmers, continue farming. And then others have skills as craftsmen to do other things. So the stone houses are there, and also two stone bridges. The double span one is north of Oldenburg, not in the historic district, but this is called to go up to Hamburg, a village to the north, named after the great city of Hamburg. And the single span is on Water Street, and which was actually built in the 1890s, all of native limestone. This picture from 1893-94 shows the old stone church, which was completed in the 1840s, which, by the way, is during the time of the Mexican War. So this church then was not torn down, but rather it was rehabilitated into the friary. And a friary is where friars live, and friars are members of the Franciscan order or of the Dominican order, as opposed to monks, because Franciscans don't live in a monastery. However, most people refer to that building as a monastery, but technically it's just a friary. And there to the left is the wall of the Holy Family brick church. And as I said, it was very clever because that was a large open space, and so they merely added a floor and divided up into two levels, and then built the larger monastery around it. They were very clever and very frugal. Don't waste the resources. I'll get back to that topic. So the stone church is a major stone building. It's the largest of the stone buildings, and here it is without its onion dome. But notice that this is the enclosure wall before the friary to give private space for the community of friars. Now, I think the most important stone building after the stone church is the Hugel House. The Hugel House was constructed in 1845 and with several enlargements over time. This was built by Joseph Hugel as a residence and also as an inn. It is distinguished for its size, and it's a good sized building. And it's also distinguished for its mitered arch. So it's not a round arch, but it's an arch that comes intersecting. And the whole purpose of that is to relieve the pressure from the rest of the stonework up above over this opening. But it also has a lintel. And this lintel is very interesting, I think. And it's funny because after the loss of German language, some people thought that this was in German. Well, it's just initials. This is a wonderful piece of sculpture. I do not know who sculpted it, nor do I know where it came from. It's one single piece of limestone, and it has a scroll, a paper scroll depicted in stone. On the scroll are 4 letters, I-H-E-H. So that's Joseph Hugel and his wife Elizabeth. And the good part is it's dated more faintly, but it says 1845. Now, the scroll inscription is framed by a beautiful floral wreath, which is an ellipse. And, and of course, this is very, very literal. There is a ribbon tied around the wreath, and the ribbon then hangs on a nail. Of course, the nail is made of stone as well. Then it is flanked by a crescent moon and the sun. And of course, that's the signal. If you've gone to IHOP, if you've gone to IHOP, they use the sun and the moon because they should be open all times, breakfast anytime. But here the sun is, and the moon, because it's an inn and it's functioning there to accommodate travelers. Now, one take on this is from my grandfather. It's a humorous take. And he said that, well, when you go into the tavern, of course, this was a tavern as well as an inn. You go into the tavern and maybe you're not full strength after working all day. But then after having a couple drinks, you come out lit up like the sun. Now, the brickyard opening changes everything. Most of the buildings constructed in this second period are brick, which were manufactured locally at the Gehring brickyard. The Gehrings farmed, but also operated a brickyard for 50 years. Beatus, which is a Latin name, and Beatus means blessed. Beatus Gehring came to Oldenburg from Baden by way of Dearborn County. He was recruited by Father Franz Joseph Rudolph, who noticed that he had settled as a brickmaker, had settled in Dearborn County. The brickyard produced millions of bricks between 1858 and 1908. The construction of the 1862, of course, where do we find the bricks? Everywhere. This double, which is the Sellmeyer double, and then also the Burdick store down here. And the Burdick name is in stamped sheet metal up above in German Fraktur letters. Then we go to the Gehring farm itself. The Gehring farm is on a hill to the south of Oldenburg, and it's a great view. So it's photographers like that point of view. So there's the brick house, of course. There is that brick corn crib, and the roof is made of tile. It's the only house in Oldenburg surviving that had a tile roof. Bricks were used then for the 1862 Holy Family Church, which was much larger and replaced the stone church. This was also the work of Father Franz Joseph Rudolph. And also the monastery uses local bricks. Monastery completed in 1894, immediately south of the Holy Family Church. It also had a 1930s addition, which was fireproof and concrete construction because it was the archives and the library for the seminary. So this friary also functioned as a seminary. And then, of course, for the 1898 convent chapel, which was designed by D.A. Bolin and Son of Indianapolis. And next to it and attached to it is the finished in 1901. It is the Sisters of St. Francis Immaculate Conception Convent and Academy, which is right on Main Street. Now, tile, until fairly recently, were also found on the summer kitchen behind a house on Pearl Street. As you can see, it's still functioning with a few problems, but unfortunately, the whole building has been demolished. And I don't know if he saved the tile, but this is what those tile look like. They're very narrow and long, and it also, as you can see, there's a cleat at an end, so it can hang on the skip sheathing of the roof without using a nail. And then also, that is also coming directly from medieval Germany. I went to an open air museum in Bad Windsheim, which is the Franconian area. And they had a tile factory there. And it had the exact same tiles with a cleat or looked like a thumb, a curved thumb as the hanger. Bricks were used for the enclosure wall for the convent as well as for the friary. And then also some of the sidewalks were paved with bricks. And unfortunately, most of them have been covered over since sometime after the 80s with concrete, but those were brick sidewalks. Of course, you want to see those in Indianapolis, you go to Lockerbie Square. And then after the friary closed in 1908, we then see more wood frame structures built, not with heavy timber framing, but with the standard American balloon framing with 2x4 stud walls. So we'll see that, and it's easy when you see those buildings, you can sell. Well, it's after the Brickyard, and we know it, we can easily date them. And then one or two bungalows, looking from either the teens or the 1920s. The post-war additions to Oldenburg. So most of the lots are filled with historic buildings. We have some post-war lots with ranch houses, the ubiquitous ranch house of the post-war period, and then this little, I call it a colonial cottage, which are also part of the landscape. And also this gas station, which was Overmeyer's, I like that name, which was made of concrete block but faced with brick. And then it is adjoined by a wood frame house where the proprietor would live. And then we come to my favorite non-religious, so a secular brick building here in Oldenburg. And it is the building which was constructed during the Civil War. And the Civil War had nothing to do with that. It's just that's the time period. And this was built for Anton Hochmann, and Hochmann was also from the Grand Duchy of Oldenburg. And in the 1890s, his son later added all this ornamental work. Everything that's white is stamped sheet metal, and it's all intact. It's 100% intact from over a century ago. But it was a rather plain 3.5-story building. There we see some details, and they're absolutely stunning, all done in the German Renaissance style. Its neighbor across the street. So these look like stone rustication. It's all stamped sheet metal. All these hoods are stamped sheet metal over the windows, and then also the entablature with the cornice is all stamped sheet metal. So Caspar Gaupel, who was a immigrant, was he and his son-in-law had this shop which ran obviously for 2 generations and producing this for Oldenburg and in other places. My great-grandfather bought this 1-story house, added a 2nd story faced in brick, and then also commissioned Gaupel to have to build for him an oriel which projects outward from the building. So this is where my great-grandparents lived and raised, let's see, Florentine, Ed, Louis, Joseph, Cleofa, Angela, and Verena. I think I counted eight children here. Now, other metals that we'll find are decorative work, such as this, which is all made of wrought iron. This is a post right in front of the sisters. I say the sisters. That's shorthand for Sisters of St. Francis in their convent chapel. I don't know if that was made locally, as it was architect design, the chapel was. And then we find some simple ironwork here in an apron right below the display window of that magnificent building built by Hockman. Then we go out to the cemetery. See that it doesn't stop. We go out to the cemetery. All the old stones are inscribed in German. And this is the southern part of it. So I'm sorry, it's the western part where just about all the stones are German. But we also find sprinkled in there a number of iron crosses, crosses made of, well, there's one that's wrought iron, but the rest of them are cast iron. And these cast iron grave markers, which are Eiserne Grabkreuze, Eiserne iron, Grab, grave, and Kreuz, cross. They're sprinkled throughout, and then they also are identified on the back as to the name of the maker, and it says Oldenburg, Indiana, but it says USA in French for some reasons best known to themselves, and then also the model number. So he may have had a catalog which he distributed. Now, what I did, I cleaned this one up and painted it, and based on research of these grave markers, which can be found throughout Northern Europe, especially in Germany. So upon viewing the town, a visitor may be amazed to find that this museum quality town is functioning as a real town with real Oldenburgers rather than tour guides in costumes. The brick cottages and the timber frame houses. And again, this is the most ancient one going back to the 1830s. It's a centered stone chimney. Walls are made of wood and mud. Change occurs here incrementally. And of course, there's the serenity of the cemetery of the Sisters of St. Francis. This was a fairly recent, when I say fairly recent, the old stones aren't there. They're inside of the chapel because they had to move the cemetery northward as they expanded it in the early 20th century. So these are the stones which are all identical, like in a military cemetery, of the sisters in the order who have deceased and were buried there, including the foundress herself. That's her marker there on right by the trees. The parish cemetery is just on the other side of the trees. And here are some of these wooden slats that will be located also in the cavities, covered with mud intertwined with the twigs. So as I said, this is in 1980. I helped myself. The door was gone. I helped myself and was amazed to find this building, which really had not been altered inside or out since its construction. And eventually later that year, I got word that it was demolished. When I went back in December of 1980, that's all that was left of it. It's just that lonesome chimney. Another interesting half timber building with Fachwerk is this one. It looks like a Greek Revival building. Of course, Greek Revival is a popular style, which has, of course, a Greek temple front. And it also has a ghost lettering here. So the name of the tavern was painted there, and up at the right angle you could read that, and it was the Pete Pistner's Saloon, and it was called the Bauerheim, the Farmer's Home Saloon. And this was the real deal with heavy timber framing with the wattle and daub. So this is very early, before the brickyard opened. And then over time, the family expanded and built a two-story house behind it, which is just of stud walls, not heavy timber frame. And then that was removed, and then eventually this whole thing was covered with vinyl siding, but it's still there. Other changes occur, such as the application of aluminum or vinyl siding over this little cottage and the next one, which are nearly identical. And those are also heavy timber frame. They're either brick or wattle and daub construction. This building was brick and gets a makeover poorly with windows that don't fit into the openings. This was the tannery at one time. So you didn't want to live too close to that because of the bad smell. But the source of water there was the creek. This building also, as I said, there's a tradition, and it was also here in Indianapolis of German merchants living above their shops. So here was the residential entrance, and there was the commercial entrance. This building has been altered, but and you can see the new brick that was used. But fortunately, they kept the stone and brick steps, which also shelters the doorway and steps down into the basement. And other alterations. And so I guess the best thing to do is make the most of it by painting symbols from the famous German-American drinking song, Schnitzelbank. So those figures are painted on this. And that same building I just showed you earlier, there it is, faring not too well with plywood covering the doorway and with a very small, strange window cut into it. I mentioned before, this is the summer kitchen behind this house. Summer kitchens were a good idea. It kept the heat. Of course, you had to cook every day if you wanted to eat. And these summer kitchens then took the heat outside of the house. Didn't heat up the whole house, but it heated up this building a lot. The tile roof, as I said, was the only other tile roof that had survived, but the whole building's gone now. These are good intentions, I think. This was mild compared to if we go to Batesville. They have fake German historicism plastered onto a building, which is 19th century German American building, also with sheet metal work here on the second level and also up in the cornice, which may have been the work of that same Oldenburg tinsmith, Caspar Gaupel. The town hall, which was built in the 1870s, also functioned as the Eagle Fire Company headquarters. This was sandblasted in 1978. So when I got there to do the inventory, they had just finished the sandblasting. And of course, anyone dealing with historic preservation, you do not sandblast brick buildings because it erodes the hardest part of the brick itself. And I became really interested and started going to other German Catholic cemeteries to find other examples of these Eisner Grabkreuze. So here it looks before I worked on it and afterwards. And of course, I use gold following the examples that I saw in images of German cemeteries. The nameplate is gone, that stamped sheet metal. As I said before, of several different styles, only one has its nameplate. Now, the Franciscan Friary and Seminary was finished in 1894, and it is an imposing building, and it still had its original doors and cast iron railing and so on. Everything was intact. And they closed the seminary. It was closed by the Franciscans of the St. John the Baptist province. That means that's the geographic unit of how the Franciscans have divided the world into administrative units. And so the Franciscans closed the friary and the seminary, and it was just sitting vacant for almost 10 years. So, but there was a mood, a sense of foreboding that it wasn't going to go well. So, Historic Landmarks Foundation put on the Oldenburg Past and Future Workshop, which included a presentation by me on Oldenburg architecture, but also the Department of Architecture, School of Architecture at the Miami of Ohio University. We're there with student presentations with models, drawings, showing how a building can be rehabilitated for a new use. And there was also a tour. Yes, there I am, long ago when I was young. So there's another great view of Oldenburg from Gering's Hill. This view by a photographer from Cincinnati, 1901. And of course, it actually is a panoramic view, so it doesn't show all of it. But there you can see the distinctive skyline and even the bell tower. Yeah, we'll count that as a spire for the town hall. And then how it looks in the mist of December of 1980. It looks the same except for the onion dome was gone. This is a postcard view. So Oldenburg would get visitors. The visitors were people who were visiting relatives, either in the friary or in the convent, but also of people just curious of seeing a very unusual place of this small town with these very large, imposing religious buildings. And again, what's missing is the onion dome right here. Now, I'll give you a quick look at the postscriptum of Oldenburg since I did my original study. So this view is, as I mentioned before, is from 1901, taken from Gering's Hill and Gering's farm, but also for 50 years made all of the bricks, which fulfilled the vision of Father Franz Joseph Rudolph to make Oldenburg a great German Catholic religious and education center. So by my reckoning, these are the losses eroding the building by building, the historic architectural fabric of Oldenburg. And the big loss here was the big building, the Franciscan Friary. And then also, as I mentioned before, the brick paved sidewalks had been covered over. Going back to this, I think that we're starting to bear the fruits of this, which was presented in 1981. National Register nomination as announced in the Brookville Democrat, and it's listed in the National Register. And it's interesting that the writer here, which was probably someone from the Department of Natural Resources who wrote this, that it reflects the old world heritage. The town's many Catholic churches, actually there's only 2 churches, monasteries, there's one, and other religious buildings are known for their spires, which dominate the landscape. Traditional religious celebrations held annually in Oldenburg since 1846 still attract visitors from throughout the Midwest. That's referring to the Corpus Christi procession. So the Oldenburg Preservation Association was formed out of that workshop in 1981. And there you see the coat of arms of the town adapted to the preservation. And then also Historic Landmarks Foundation and the Oldenburg Preservation Association did publish this little pamphlet, a walk through Oldenburg, Indiana. As I said, I wrote that after I moved back to Indiana. I moved to Indiana in 1983, so that was to take the job at the Preservation Commission. And the backside of it, which incorporates the old stone church from the 1840s. And this is trying to raise awareness that the monastery, I know it's not a monastery, the friary is of something of value. And so this was an attempt to raise awareness. And I witnessed then in July of 1985, the destruction of this building, which did not have a leaking roof. It had no broken windows. It was completely intact. It was just heartbreaking to witness this. The Archdiocese of Indianapolis, which then became the owner, deemed the building as disposable. What a waste of resources and goodwill. Even the friary enclosure wall was destroyed. Now, these century-old postcard views prove that the village of Spires was unique and was a great source of pride. Look at that skyline. That's very, very unique. As the Oldenburg Preservation Association faded after the crushing defeat of the monastery, the torch was passed to a new generation. I should say that in a certain type of accent. It empowered, and it empowered with an active pride the new generation. Oldenburg Freudenfest Incorporated, which operates the biggest little German festival in Indiana every July. And it's 2 days. This year it's 19th and 20th of July. It was responsible for a great victory of restoring the distinctive onion dome, or the Zwiebelturm. Zwiebel means onion, to the skyline. So after being in place for 101 years, the onion dome was removed, which was made of wood from the old stone church because of lack of maintenance. And this was the first spire of the village of Spires. And there it is. It was in one piece, shipped here from northern Kentucky. Campbell Industries fabricated it. And the flag that you see here, actually, there I am. And I was so happy to be there on that day, the day of triumph. That flag is the town of Oldenburg, which is the same flag as the city of Oldenburg in Germany. And there it is, up and away, being set in place, and there it is for all to view. And it says, if someone wrote, "Congratulations, Oldenburg, it's an historic day." And it really was. This is a day of joy. The Onion Dome from this 1901 view. And this has to do with this interest and this vitality coming from this Freudenfest committee. And the coat of arms over here on the side is the coat of arms of the village and dome, the parish church, and also the convent chapel tire. Now, the Hugel house was not in good shape. It had been falling into disrepair after serving as a rental for decades. So the new owner, who is of this new mindset, rescued the house in 2021 and 22. And so that means relaying some of the stones which had been weakened or leaning. And then I got to go inside, and this was the thrill for me to see authentic fachwerk, which was used for the interior walls. So there are the woven branches, which then are woven around these oak slats. And in this case, it's the ceiling. And these slats the whole thing is covered with mud. And what that does is it's soundproof, but also it's insulation. So the efforts of 1981 are bearing fruit. This 1861, 1863, 3.5-story commercial building was built by Anton Hockmann, who came from the Grand Duchy of Oldenburg. It received its sheet metal German Renaissance embellishment in the 1890s by his son, who became the owner. William Holker is here with his employees, and William Holker leased and operated this department store with his sons for 50 years. But it has been owned and occupied by the descendants of Anton Hockmann for 6 generations. And so the 6th generation has a baby. The baby's living there, so we'll count it as 7 generations. And there is my great-great-grandfather, Franz Joseph Holker, who was the tailor. And he came and was the tailor at the St. Joseph Woolen Mill. And he came here from Westphalia to Cincinnati to Lafayette, Indiana, and then to Oldenburg. And I'm sure he made all of the uniforms for the Eagle Fire Company. And Gilbert Munchell was my mentor, but he had been mentored by my grandfather, Florentine Joseph Holker. So I learned from him, but he learned from my grandfather. I sat many, many hours sitting on this wonderful porch, talking and listening, talking and listening. And that's it. Das Ende, the end.